Okay, to create a congruent segment, you create a ray longer than the segment. You pick up your compass and you set it so that you can adjust the length of your compass to the length of that segment. You can see that right now that would go through the end, and I'm just going to go ahead and put that mark there. You move this to the other segment, you put it on the end point of the ray, and you make your mark there. And then these two segments that were created are in fact congruent. To create congruent angles, which is what number 2 is, the first thing you do is draw a ray. You need this common end point that you can see. I'm going to pick up my compass. I'm going to adjust the width of my compass so that I can see that my compass will intersect the angle in 2 different spots. And I'm going to go ahead and make an arc. I'm going to pick up my compass and I'm going to make the exact same arc then without adjusting the width. I'm going to make that exact same arc in the other. Then I pick up my compass and I have to readjust the length so that the length would be, dang it. Let me reset this. Give me just a second. You can see I moved the angle instead of moving my protractor. Okay. Not quite there. Gotta move the angle just a little bit. There we go. Now I'm back to where it should be. Okay? Now I'm going to pick up my compass and I'm going to set it for the length of this other arc that's in here. If I set one end point on it, I'm going to rotate it around and I'm going to adjust it until I can see that this other end would in fact be that long. I pick it up, I set it on where the arc intersected, and I make the little cross mark. The point where these two met is the point that I want to connect to my original end point, and I simply am going to connect the dots. And there's my angle that's congruent. 3 is the same as 1. I'm going to create a ray that is longer than the segment that's there. I'm going to pick up my compass, set one end point on the end. I'm going to rotate my compass around and adjust it so that I can see that it's now set for the length of that segment. I'm going to set it on the end point of my ray, and I'm going to make that mark. And so there are the end points of my segments, and those two segments would be congruent. Congruent angle, first thing I have to do is draw a ray. So there's my ray. There's an end point of my ray, and it's continuing this way. This end point and this end point then would be treated the same. I pick up my compass. I set it on the vertex of the first original angle. I adjust my compass so that I can see that it's going to cross both sides of the arc. And I'm going to create an arc. Without changing the setting, I set it on my other end point, and I create an identical arc to it. I now have to pick it up, and I'm going to reset this so that the width of this is adjusted to the width of the arc that was made. And I'm going to go ahead and draw that in so you can see that that's what I did. And I pick up my compass. I'm going to set where the arc crossed the ray. I'm going to rotate it around so that I can create the other arc. And there are the 2 points that I'd like to connect. Point where the 2 arcs crossed, and then that end point of the ray. And I simply, again, connect my dots. And the 2 angles would be congruent. When they're asked to bisect, I'm going to bisect a segment. I'm also going to bisect an angle. When you're bisecting a segment, it's important when you set it on the end point, when you rotate it around, the only thing that's critical is that you're more than halfway. I like to be about 3/4 of the length. You make a mark on both sides. So I'm going to make an arc on the right. I'm going to make an arc on the left. I'm going to pick it up without changing the setting. And I'm going to set it on the other end point. And I'm going to go through that same process. I'm going to make an arc that's on the left. I'm going to rotate it and make an arc that's on the right. And I should be able to see where those arcs actually intersect. Here's one of my intersections. Here's the other. And I simply am going to, again, connect my dots. If I've done that right, then this should be perpendicular, and it should be perpendicular in a way that it cut that into 2 equal pieces. When you're bisecting an angle, I'm going to take this and I'm going to set the vertex down here on my angle. I'm going to adjust the width of it so that I can see that it'll clearly intersect both sides. And I'm going to make an arc that intersects both pieces. I'm going to pick up my compass and I'm going to make an arc on the inside of the angle. I'm going to go to the other point where the arc, and I'm going to make another arc on the inside of the angle. You should see that you now have a point where the 2 arcs intersected. And all I have to do is connect the vertex to that point of intersection. And now I've created an angle bisector. 7 and 8 are identical to 5 and 6. Pick up my compass, set it on end point. I'm going to rotate this around so that I can adjust it to more than half. Again, no magical number, but I do seem to like about 3/4 of the length. And I'm going to pick this segment up and I'm going to actually slide it down so I got a little room to work. Otherwise I was going to be off the page. So you can again see I've moved my compass. I'm set for about 3/4 of the length. I'm going to make an arc both above and below the line. And without changing the setting, I'm going to go over to the other end point and I'm going to do the same thing, both below and above. And you should be able to see then that you have these 2 points of intersection. And we are simply going to, again, connect those dots, which means this should be 90 degrees, and these 2 pieces would be, in fact, congruent. Bisecting the angle. Set the point of the compass on the vertex. You can see I'm too far to the outside. I'm going to readjust this so that I can see that when I draw this angle in here, that it will in fact intersect both sides of the angle. I'm going to pick up my compass. I'm going to move it to one endpoint. I'm going to readjust it so it's just a little bigger. I'm going to make an arc on the inside of the angle. Come over to the other endpoint. I'm going to rotate it around and make another arc until I can see that those two arcs are in fact going to intersect. Again, it's that point of intersection that I'm really interested in, because that point and the vertex become my angle bisector. Number 9, we're going to construct a line through Y that is parallel to AB. This is probably the hardest one of the group. You need to connect Y to line AB. No magic to where you connect it. It can go anywhere. I'm actually going to connect it to A through Y. So I'm just going to draw a line that goes from A to Y. Yeah. Needs a little adjustment so that it does go through it. Sometimes easier to just use a ruler than it is to do things electronically. Okay, so there's my line. And the whole goal now is going to be to create an angle here that would be the same as an angle here. Because if I do that, I'd have corresponding angles. So the side that creates this angle, therefore, would be parallel to this angle. So I pick up my compass. I set it on vertex A. I adjust the width of my compass. And I make an arc across the angle. Without changing the setting, I come up to point Y, and I do the exact same thing. I now have to create a congruent angle. I've got to make sure that my arc length is the same. So I'm going to readjust my compass so that I can see that it does intersect it where the arc crossed the line. And I'm going to come up here and make the same mark. That point of intersection that was created up here and point Y are the 2 points that I'm interested in. And I am simply going to draw my line through Y and that point. Let me undo that. And then we'll just adjust it just a little bit. So that you can see that it does go through there. And if it does go through and these two angles are in fact then congruent, then these two lines would in fact then be parallel to each other because corresponding angles would be congruent. Number 10, same process. Doesn't matter which ones I connect. So I'm just going to connect this point Y and this point A. Again, the goal would be to recreate this angle so that it would be up here so that I have corresponding angles congruent. I'm going to place my compass on the vertex of the angle. And I'm going to make an arc that goes across both sides. Without changing the setting, I do the same thing from point Y. I pick up my compass and I reset it so that it's at the width of that angle. Make that mark. And I'm going to come here and do the same thing. That point of intersection again is what I'm interested in, and I'm going to connect that point of intersection with this point Y. And if I've done this properly, these two lines will in fact be parallel again, because these corresponding angles will be in fact congruent. Constructing a line perpendicular to a line but through a specific point. You put your point of your compass on that point, and you just make sure that your compass is adjusted so that it will intersect both sides of that point, and you make a little construction mark on both sides. You pick up your compass and you set it on one of those arcs, and you readjust it so it's about 3/4 of that length, so halfway between P and the other arc mark. I make a mark both above and below. I pick up my compass, I set it on the other point, and I in fact do the same thing. I make a mark below and I make a mark above. You can see where I need to extend this one line out so that I can see where it intersects. These 2 points of intersection are in fact what I'm interested in, and I simply am again going to connect my dots. If I've done all this properly, then it will go through this point P that was on this line, and it'll do so in a fashion where it's perpendicular. Same thing, going to pick up the compass, going to set it on point P. I'm going to make an arc on both sides. I'm just going to swing this around to make sure that it does actually intersect it. A little bit wide maybe. I'm going to make a mark on the bottom side, one here towards the top. I'm going to pick up my compass, I'm going to set it on the arc, make sure that it's adjusted for more than half. Again, I kind of like 3/4. I'm going to put an arc on both sides. Pick up my compass, move it to the other arc intersection. Again, making a mark on both sides. Where the 2 arcs actually intersected, they intersected here and here. I am simply going to connect those dots. Again, if I've done so properly, then this angle would in fact be a 90-degree angle. Here we're going to construct a line through P that's perpendicular to A and B. So I put it on point P. I got to rotate my compass around. Right now it's not adjusted wide enough. I got to make sure that it's adjusted wide enough so that it will intersect this line at 2 points. And I'm going to make that arc. I can pick it up then and move it to where the arc intersected. I don't even need to change the setting. Sometimes you might want to change it a little wider. And where the 2 arcs actually intersected, I use that same setting and I create 2 more arcs. If you've done so properly, you'll have a point of intersection, and we connect that point to point P. And I will now have a line that actually goes through P and through that other point in such a way that it is perpendicular to AB. 14, same thing. Set it on P. Readjust the compass so that I can see that when I swing it around, that it will intersect the segment in 2 places. Pick up the compass, set it where those spots intersected. Make the 2 arcs that are necessary to see the intersection. There's my intersection, there's point P, and all I want to do is connect those dots. And again, if I've done so properly, this should be a 90-degree angle. 15 and 16, they asked me to construct an equilateral triangle. Pick up the compass, set the end point on the end of the segment. I'm going to rotate this around so that you can see I'm going to adjust my compass length to the length of that segment. You can see it's going through the end. I'm going to make an arc using that measurement. I'm going to go to the other end point. I'm going to rotate it around, make an arc. I now have 3 points of interest. I have the end point here, an end point here, and the 2 points where they intersected. And I simply am going to connect the end points together. For number 16, I do the same thing. I'm going to rotate my protractor around and adjust that length so that I can see that I'm at the length of that segment. I'm going to keep rotating it. I'm going to make an arc from that segment. I'm going to come over to the other arc. I'm going to do the same thing. And again, I have 3 points of interest to me. I have the 2 end points of the segment, and I have the point of intersection of the 2 arcs, and I simply am going to connect those points together. And again, if I've done both of these correctly, this should be an equilateral triangle, meaning all of these sides are the same. Likewise, when I came over here, these sides should all be congruent. Bring a ruler and or a compass, and a protractor. If you don't have a straight edge, I do, but please bring a protractor for tomorrow's quiz.